Calling all beings. Calling all beings.
Can anybody give me an amen for calling all beings this afternoon? Welcome back in the joint. I'm your host, DJ, along with the co-creator of this whole damn thing and who's responsible for everything you see in front of you. And that's Money Nathan with his Space Force mug. And just down diagonally from him is the girl. I'll tell you what, she's been doing this for a minute. She sounds like she might have had some organic mushrooms of something today. That is a study of UAP Debs. And of course, the curly-haired young lady to her left is none other than Courtney Connected. Welcome, guys. What's up, Nathan?
What is up, man? Happy Saturday, everybody. It's going to be a good one, brother. I'm feeling it.
Debs, where you at, Holmes?
I just want to pick our guest brain about what is going on right now. I want a statement of modern times. That is what I'm looking forward to today.
We're going to talk about this dude that done shook up the UAP disclosure world. What's up, Scott McGinnis? What's up, Beatrice, Jules? We'll say hi to everybody before we bring him in the joint real quick. Is this gentleman named Jake Barber. He done shook up this whole damn thing. It's a snow globe right there.
Little seasoning, you know what I'm saying?
Courtney, you okay? Everything good?
Yeah, I have a house full right now, so it's not my usual. You know, I've got kids and dog and cat, and they're all looking, so I'm looking back. You know how it is. It's family. It's family life.
That's all good, man. That is all good. There's Kristen Thompson, I believe from Denmark. Correct us on that, Christian. We did the Nordic roundtable with you. Hi, and can you read this one? Into Berna? Is that what that says? I might need me glasses.
Into Berna, that's what it says, yeah.
Into Berna. Hello, Julie's here, the Jewel of the Nile, our co-collaborator from TCU, Beatrice, Standing Stone 1776, and one of the Canton original gangsters, Scott McGinnis, along with Colleen, Itchy Withers Horse Rescue, which I believe is in New Hampshire. Love what you're doing up there, girlfriend. All right. We got to bring this brother on because we only got him an hour because it's the UK. And this brother need to go to sleep. He's already got his damn jammies on. He is the creator of the Liberation Times. He's the one who's got a direct line. He's got this red phone to Susan Gobb. Yo, Susan, this is Christopher Sharp in the UK. What the is going on over there? And he wants to be clear. He did not go to a public school. He went to a state school. And then, of course, he graduated from the University of Winchester. And he is none other than the man himself, the writer of Liberation Times. Put him together for Christopher Sharp. Can anybody here give me an amen for Christopher?
Amen.
Hell yeah, you can. All right. Christopher Sharp, my bruh. What's going on, man? You're on mute, mate. Nathan, put us in the quad chart because if there's anything from the chat, when I put it up, it's going to cover up y'all faces.
All right. You got it. You got it.
Thank you. All right. Christopher, we still can't hear you. That new microphone, I'm about to throw. Where'd he go? Is he on mute, Nathan?
He might be.
Can you do
There we go.
There we go.
Perfect.
People want to hear those dulcet tones. Do you know what I'm saying, Chris?
It's true.
even though you went to a state school, right?
Well, I was going to say, you put an idea into my head. Maybe I could do like a podcast with Susan. Like maybe like 10 years or so, the Chris and Susan show or something, you know? Maybe you can collaborate one day in a post-disclosure kind of world, you know?
I love that.
We would love to. I know one person you don't want to do a show with, and that's Hera, because she's gonna tear your show up. All right, girlfriend. We'll see you.
Hera the Terra. Love it.
Hera the Terra. All right. Oh my God, Chris. I think we got to just jump into this because what's happened with Jake Barber, the former, the construct that he's under, I haven't even heard of really, unless we consider Staff Sergeant Dan Sherman. What has, and internationally or even in the UK, what have you gleaned from this? This, to me, this is like we were just talking about shaking up the snow globe of UAP disclosure. What are your impressions of Jake Barber? What are you hearing, sir?
I think, like a lot of people, I am still digesting it. It seems to stack up with a lot of the talk that I was hearing before the new year in terms of what was on its way. And I would also say that very, very credible people, both in public and privately, are vouching for him. So I see him as credible. I think that there are some holes in the story that are there for good reason. Let's just say when you're doing retrieval missions, like we've reported on before, allegedly what happens is you both have a JSOC and CIA component. So you're operating under Title 10 and Title 50 authorities. That's always something to consider. And in the Jake Barber interview, we haven't heard CIA yet. And that's interesting to me. Very interesting.
Very smart. You don't want to get your ass in trouble. Go ahead, Nathan. Take it away, brother.
Yeah, Chris, so you had an article earlier this month, UFO Disclosure Endgame, where you kind of talked about the very sort of imminent nature of disclosure kind of percolating in the atmosphere right now. What with the Trump administration, a lot of folks in the Trump campaign that seem to be very much pro UFO, potentially. We'll see. A lot of those names have been confirmed. That process is moving forward. Cabinet's coming together. What are you hearing in terms of the potential for movement there? We recently had him sign the executive order about the declassification of the rest of the JFK files, RFK files, MLK assassination, that kind of thing. Do we think that the UFO piece of it is literally on the table, or is that kind of maybe a bit of a pipe dream at this point?
It should be on the table. It's been presented. The paper for a UAP czar, which was presented by Louis Elizondo and the UAP Disclosure Fund, has been presented and sent to the Trump team. I know that. And we're just waiting to see if it's accepted. And they do go ahead with a disclosure process now. We know that all the right components are in place. We've got Ratcliffe at CIA. Tulsi Gabbard, it's been said to me, is pro-disclosure as well. We've got RFK Jr., who's been on the record saying he wants disclosure. And we have Mike Waltz as well, who I've been told is very, very pro-disclosure. And he is also backed by Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel is a very, very key figure behind this. Peter Thiel, I believe, gave the largest, well, one of the largest campaign donations in history for a Senate race for J.D. Vance. So this guy's very, very powerful. He's got a lot of money. And he's also backed Mike Waltz. He's backed Donald Trump. So he's got links all over this White House, this guy. And Peter Thiel's very, very interested. I've heard this from several sources. Very, very interested in UAP. He's funded a lot of initiatives, from my understanding, as well in the UAP world. And he's a billionaire with immense political power. So I believe he wants access to technology. It wouldn't surprise me if he's tag teaming with Elon Musk as well. Even if Elon Musk doesn't accept the allegation that there is a non-human presence here, he does want access to those classified programs involving space technologies. So everything is primed. The incentives are there for people to act. We're just waiting to see if Trump kind of like has the cojones to act. You know, I mean, he's said that he's going to declassify the RFK files, JFK files, Martin Luther King files. And Chuck Schumer has already thrown down the gauntlet saying, come on then, like, what about the UFO files? So Trump likes to present himself as this kind of person who's going to tear apart the deep state and stuff like that. And that's kind of Schumer basically saying, "Come on, then, like I'll go there. I'll take on the gatekeepers. I already have with my Schumer amendment." So Trump, if you are kind of like this person you're presenting yourself to be, go all the way, do it. Otherwise, you don't have the cojones that I did.
Yeah, just one thing I want to say to the audience. We are now, what are we, 30 or 40 subscribers away from 7,000, which would be a really good kind of landmark for Cab. So if you're so inclined, please hit the subscribe button, and we appreciate it. And Nathan, do you have any follow-up, or are we ready to pass it to Debs?
No, I think, Chris, you set the table really nicely there, and I know we're going to get into some more details, so I'll pass it on to Deb.
You know, when you were talking about the involvement of Trump, I thought about what was going to come out with Martin Luther King. A lot of it has been rumor, but there's an indication that he was not a perfect human being, and the public at large will find that out. I don't believe there's any such thing as a perfect human being, by the way. But do you think that this disclosure of UAP could have a blowback? Could there be, like, for instance, if one case everyone was setting their bets on was found to be our technology, there could be some blowback? Do you think there's a double-edged sword here?
So I think it's a bit of both. I think it's a complex web. I think that the US was making its own advancements in kind of like aerospace technology, way back in the 30s and 1940s. That's my belief, and I think that it was on its way to kind of like potentially unlocking anti-gravitic technology in the 1950s, perhaps with or without kind of non-human technology, let's say. So I think there's stuff that the US may have developed by itself. There's other stuff that has been replicated from non-human technology, I believe, as well. So I think it's a bit of both. And then obviously you have the non-human technology as well. So it's a bit of a mess in the skies. And also non-human intelligence as well. That's a bit of a bit of a mixed pot. It's been said to me that there are multiple intelligences visiting this planet and walking among us, perhaps as well. And you don't just say, "Oh, species of Nordics are all good, and this other species is all bad." Whatever. It's kind of like humans. It's not like It's not like all Russians are bad and all Americans are good. You've got some good people, some bad people, some in between. It's so that's kind of being communicated to me in terms of that as well. But in answer to your question, I think that's going to be one of the most sensitive areas in terms of technology, and that's where the blowback would be potentially, especially if you're classifying that technology for strategic surprise. I think that's very, very important to consider in terms of a national security perspective.
And I'm going to pass it to Courtney, but I just want to acknowledge that we've gotten some gifts here. This is a friend of the show who's helped me out with some programming and is really just an amazing friend. Sarah in shock and horror, if you can use a Massachusetts accent. If you can use a Massachusetts accent when you say that, Chris, and you can sound like John F. Kennedy, our great former president from Hyannisport. I don't know if you can do that accent, Chris, but if you can, because you got the British accent down. Like you totally have it, man. You know what I mean? It's so natural. But thank you, Sarah, for the 20. Christian Thompson, our friend who I think is from Denmark. Keep up the good work, Christopher Sharp, because this guy he's a bad mother, and you know how that ends. Also want to thank the Petty Paralegal. This is Jen. I got to meet her and her husband at the meal of food we had in Massachusetts, and not only is her husband a badass, but Jen herself is also a badass, and helped her extricate her husband from the Army as an enlisted man and into the Air Force as an officer. So good job, Jen, with your letter writing. So anyway, yeah, she's awesome. So thank you to everybody, and thank you for your kindness. And now, Chris, if you want to do your John F. Kennedy accent toward the end of the show, we'll get that set up for you.
I know. I usually hear people say garbage, garbage, like, and they use like a kind of Massachusetts kind of like Boston accent, saying you're garbage or something like that.
You're very garbage. You know that? Your writing is garbage, Chris. No, I'm just kidding. All right, go ahead. Your writing is brilliant. Go ahead with our friend Courtney Connected.
Hey, Chris, it's so nice to see you today. And I've been wanting to talk with you for so long. So I get to like ask my, questions I've been lining up for years, like in this tiny little spot, but I'm going to try to cover it all. So you were one of the earliest people, running your shop, Liberation Times. It sprung up, and had to get traction. And over the years, you've gotten more and more traction, roads into DC. For those who haven't been following Liberation Times, you've just done a great job. So I wanted to ask you this specific question. And this is more for you personally, but also can be extrapolated for other people who want to do the same thing that you've done and carved their own trail. You've had to cover these people in DC, political power players, right? Mike Johnson, Rand Paul, all the big guns. And so in covering as a journalist, right, but also in the field of, I would say to some degree, covering the history of UFOs and the legacy programs, how have you maintained, your impartiality in your coverage? That's one thing. And then the second thing is, I know a lot of people who are doing coverage would not be necessarily considered journalists, but they are covering things potentially and getting sensitive information that could be, somewhat dangerous for them. I'm wondering if you can answer that as well, like how you've been able to do that with Liberation Times as a journalist. You're coming from the UK, so it's different from the US, but maybe you could speak with that as well, how you've been able to take some very sensitive information and bring that out in a safe way through your journalism and your journalistic standards in Liberation Times.
Thank you very much. That's really kind of you. So I think in terms of threats, it's very difficult. I mean, sometimes you will put a story. It's happened to me. I put out a story about sensitive allegations around a naval or maritime retrieval program, which included elements of the maritime branch of the CIA's operations directorate, some sensitive kind of like very, very classified systems underwater. I didn't ever reveal classified information. And it was that was from Euro, the National Underwater Reconnaissance Office, involving Special Operations Command as well, and also involving the Office of Naval Research. So kind of like put all those things together. And I told the story about that. And then when I put that story together, I was like, holy crap, like I've done the wrong thing. Like I shouldn't do that. I got a family. Like I've been told that the people involved in the naval retrieval programs are not very nice people. And I've messed up. So, I released an article with that information in, and I was like, I kind of panicked and I deleted that section from the article. I was like, I can't do this. And then one person from the UFO community basically is looking at the internet history page of Liberation Times to find it, and calls me out saying, oh, he changes his stories because he makes mistakes and stuff like that. It's like, no, I changed that story and because I didn't want to put that information out. But, as it had then been found, I just kind of reinserted that information in there. And then I think with my next article or so, I doubled down on that. And then I also named Glenn Gaffney as well, who was the alleged person who blocked the deal between Lockheed Martin and that element of what would have been the Bigelow team, let's say. And so that, a lot of people knew Gaffney's name, and he was like Voldemort, you never shall mention him. So mentioning that name in an article was like a really, really big deal. And, when I put that article out, a few people were panicking, saying you were UK, or you shouldn't have done that, or consult with a lawyer. And, people were panicking. And, come to think about it in hindsight, well, actually, if you think about it, I'm not saying that Gaffney did anything illegal. I'm basically saying that Gaffney did his job. So if those materials did belong to the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology, and Lockheed were supposed to send those back years ago, then how is he breaking the law in doing that? And how am I kind of like alleging that any wrongdoing of him that would put me in danger? So when you kind of like think about it, and sometimes in hindsight, you think, well, actually, that's not such a big deal. And I would also add as well that there may have been someone else involved with that story in terms of blocking it. So I might get onto that story one time. But yeah, so I do have legal protection though, both in the UK and the United States. So that's really good. It's nice to know that people are going to act pro bono for me if I do get any potential trouble. So that's good to know. In terms of like the impartiality and stuff like that, I mean, I've always come at the story like, because so many neutral outlets will pretend to like be impartial on the story, but you know, if you're actually kind of like using the Pentagon or an element of the intelligence community as your primary source, which defines the story itself, that's a problem. Because I studied parts of journalism when I was at university, and I learned things like primary definition, you know, like the source, you know, there's a battle of sources basically to define your story. One has to define it, and then also like how do you use a source? The source that you usually use first in the story will define the story usually, and then the source that you use at the end of the story quoting them will usually not define the story. So you know, it's kind of like any publication that says, you know, we're kind of like neutral on this, you know, or impartial. It's very difficult to do that. So I basically staked out what it was about beforehand, just saying, look, I am reporting the story like it is you know, giant kind of like conspiracy, and there's wrongdoing perhaps from the US government and contractors and stuff. So that's how I'm coming at the story, you know, like the Watergate scandal, like I'm doing it like that. That's how I'm covering the story. But when you're doing that as well, you do have to stay impartial. You don't want to get involved with like debates and wars or she said, he said, or, you know, go against anyone else in the community or anything like that. You want to stay on your mission, stay focused. So that's what I do. And, you know, I know about politics because I've been involved with like politics in the UK as part of my comm stuff like the past decade or so. So I kind of like knew how it worked from a UK perspective. And I kind of had to kind of like bring that understanding to the UAP story of how the dynamics might work. And I've also kind of had to catch up on like UK politics, intelligence community matters, how that's organized, the DoD, how that's organized. And it's been, you know, a big learning curve for me, kind of like learning all that stuff. So yeah, it's been a big kind of like mission, and it's tough. And yeah, you have to protect sensitive information as well. You have to protect your sources. You have to be prepared to go to jail to protect your sources. So that's really, really important to me as well, because people do want to find out who your sources are, and that's always a tough part of it, especially when people are digging around. So yeah, is that answering all your questions? Is that sure? Thank you.
Yeah, we have a couple questions in the chat, Chris, and I want to say, if you didn't actually take journalism in college and you're this damn good of a writer, you done did something, brother. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, we have this one from Andrew. And maybe Nathan can read it in some sort of an accent. Who knows?
I don't know if I'm ready for that. Maybe on another time, though. I like doing that sometimes. All right. This question from Andrew. Andrew, thank you. So, hi, all. Given the deep psychological and archetypal aspects of the UFO phenomena, do you think its interaction with humanity is designed to evolve our consciousness collectively? Yeah, great question there.
I guess maybe everyone would take a shot at that. Go ahead, Nathan, and then we'll go to Chris. We'll just go around the horn.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That is a good question. I think that you could look at this from two perspectives, right? So, is there an intention behind the phenomena to generate that kind of effect, to generate that change in collective consciousness, or does its mere existence have the effect of changing our consciousness? You know, I sort of lean towards the latter. So it's almost one of those things where if something is a part of your environment, something is confirmed to be part of your environment, then its presence in that environment, its interaction with all elements of the environment of which we are a part, is going to affect the way in which we perceive it. And so over time, I would think with enough time, it is going to impact, sort of the way that we think and perceive and can conceive of reality. And so I'd like to think that it does have an altering effect on us. Now, if you take the more proactive approach, a lot of people have argued that non-human intelligence is trying to steer humanity in a certain direction, or catalyze some evolving thinking on our part. Some of the people who've had reportedly direct contact with these beings, have relayed messages. A lot of them are about our over reliance on technology, or the way that we're kind of abusing the planet, the environment, seemingly trying to get us to change our ways and become a little bit more focused on achieving some kind of balance between ourselves and the nature that we are a part of. So it's a great question. I do think that consciousness and sort of the evolution of consciousness is a huge part of the phenomena, because it is one of those factors that cannot be disregarded. Like it's part of reality, just as we are part of reality. And for us to be at more harmony with what reality happens to be, we have to change. And if you go through life thinking that reality is a certain way, and you ignore all these other aspects of it, and you kind of keep on living with blinders on, I think that's not really a great way to be. And so this is sort of, I think, prodding us to say, there is more to what we might think reality happens to be, and maybe we need to incorporate those aspects into our way of being, and by doing that, we are going to change.
Yes, good, great one, Nathan.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think Nathan covered it really well. I mean, I have a strange relationship with consciousness because I have epilepsy, and it's always a strange feeling when you get the aura and you're going to lose consciousness, even though you don't want to. And it can be quite a scary feeling as well. But in those last moments before you kind of like go blank, there's like an element of peacefulness as well, which is quite nice. So I've got a strange relationship towards it. And because my epilepsy involves language as well, like sometimes I can't even think, because when you're thinking in language. And so you've got to go in a meditative state. But with that said, I mean, with the subject, I've covered it from a real kind of like nuts and bolts angle, covering the politics and stuff like that, and the process of how it's going. But covering this story and following this story, you can't ignore the consciousness aspect and the genesis of this, how all this came out through Tom DeLonge. He was talking about consciousness, about how there was a link between consciousness and how the craft worked. And we've got Dr. James Ryder, now deceased, from Lockheed Martin, the vice president, who was trying to facilitate the deal between Lockheed and the Bigelow gang. And he's going off after he's retired to consciousness conferences and spirituality conferences. So what makes someone in my kind of like journalistic head, someone so qualified, someone so down to earth in the nuts and bolts in terms of aerospace engineering and stuff like that, and all these clearances, and he's clearly a sane person, otherwise he wouldn't be in a position he was. What leads someone like that down that route? So for me, like, this is a valid kind of like area to look into, especially when you look at the people who have kind of like spoken out about the consciousness elements, both publicly and privately, for me as well. And that's something that I think is really, really quite interesting. And all I would consider when doing that, what if hypothetically, like, part of disclosure is not just kind of like finding out that there's a non-human intelligence interacting with this earth. What about if it actually changes the definition of humanity itself and being human? What if hypothetically things were found on the recovery of these vehicles that kind of could unlock secrets to enhance our consciousness? And what if every human kind of like has psychic abilities or something along those lines? And then part of disclosure would mean that a lot of the population would have these abilities. What does that mean in terms of a practical sense? How do you regulate that? How do you stop? What does privacy mean if everyone's psychic and stuff like that? And some people will use it for good, some people will use it for bad. So that presents a whole big problem. And I think Jake Barber may have actually touched upon that as well in his own interview.
He
So,
did.
yeah. So
I was going to go there.
that's really good. Yeah, so I was picking that up as well. I mean, I'm still trying to digest the interview, the great interview that Ross did. But, I think that's really, really important to consider, And obviously, we haven't had science come out yet, kind of like backing or even actually kind of like defining what consciousness is, But, I think it's been said by Eric Weinstein. It seems as though science went underground to a large extent in the 1950s, and that, physics hasn't made any real breakthroughs for decades now. And that is also something that Peter Thiel has touched upon as well. In a recent article that he did for the Wall Street Journal, I think it was, in Financial Times, and it seems really, really important to me. And it's important to touch upon, it's definitely given me food for thought.
Man, our David John Lanier, the experiencer, is in the chat here. He's had experiences both with craft at his house and beings at his house. So David's one of the first interviews we ever did on Calling All Beings. So what's up, David? All right, so we'll have to tighten it up on our answers here so we can get to more, Chris, especially if we only have them for 26 minutes more. So go ahead, Court or Debs and Courtney, please. Or go ahead and Courtney, since we're sort of keeping in order here. Go ahead.
Am I answering the original question, or am I reading this question that's up here?
Yeah, no, it's this question. Forgive me, it was the original question. We'll get to David. We'll get to David here. I've got everybody starred in the column over there.
Looking at the question of the psychological aspects, right, and some of the archetypal aspects, I think that was the question. I tend to fall. I tend to fall in the camps of people like Terence McKenna and Jacques Vallée, who talk about this co-creation aspect of our consciousness with another, because people who have had encounters or experiences tend to feel like they're in contact with another intelligence. And as you saw with Jake Barber's discussion about how he felt this sensation come over him of being in contact with another, right, and it being very feminine, I think it's all psychological. And so that's where I fall in line with it. And I've never been or heard it described so well as Greg Bishop, when he and I were talking about the psychological and archetypal aspects, that he said through all of his discussions with experiencers, he feels like there's a co-creative aspect. And that just really hit, so many different cylinders for me. I do think that there is a period after contact, which is a very critical period that we could be studying more from a psychological standpoint. Jung did call it a critical period, where there is this development or creativity or feeling on fire, from contact. So for me, I think it's very psychological, and I think that there are a lot of great academics looking at it. I think it's a really hard question to answer, but that's where I kind of fall in line, is thinking that those are the areas that I think research-wise we could really try to understand that question more and the answers.
And from my perspective, to say it, I agree with what both Chris and Courtney and Nathan said. There's obviously, and there may be both. There may actually be an intention to alter consciousness at some points and for some reasons, and there also may be just as Nathan said, as a result, a happenstance of them entering our reality and then forcing a change of your consciousness, which maybe is what happened. And I'll bring it right back to something topical. I can't state how huge this is about this young man, and I say young man, he's probably my age, in Jake Barber, and him saying that they had that. And if you want to just take somebody from the same archetype in Baker, what's his last name? That guy Baker, is it?
Fred Baker?
There's Jake Barber and
Fred Baker? Is it Fred?
Fred Baker, yep.
Okay, so Fred Baker is from the 24th STS at Pope, Tier 1 career, Tier 1 airman, combat controller. So he's cut from that same cloth, and he's talking about the same thing, about love, and as opposed to war, and about consciousness and about how he went and had basically, even if it's not the CE5 construct, because Jake said that the construct, the methodology that they used to call in a craft, which ended up in this guy Baker seeing a huge multiple football field size triangular craft, was a result of a construct or a modality that's similar to CE5, but not CE5. So that shows us that is some sort of conscious contact with this other intelligence. That can't be ignored, because if it were somebody, that didn't have that amount of public trust, sometimes people say, I'm not sure. Well, now you have what's his name saying it? I'm going to screw these guys up. Barber, you have Baker, and then you have the Delta Force officer, the guy who was an officer with Delta Force, who now has his PhD, saying the exact same thing. So this is huge for the people who are disclosure advocates. Not only the actual physical craft that they've grabbed, but also the consciousness aspect of it that a couple of them have experienced. That can't be ignored, Debs.
I wanted to just throw something out there that no one's mentioned.
Sure, you love doing that. Yeah.
Okay, other cultures are at a different place with this, and they were probably, we could say, more spiritual, more connected to this consciousness idea. They were totally fine with accepting things like spirits and aliens and, all kinds of things that people are calling supernatural or paranormal in the modern world. So maybe it's less about our consciousness being impacted by the UAPs and more about our consciousness in the modern world, quote, is evolving, so we're able to hear it and respond to it better. There's research that shows that people who have increased abilities, increased instincts, are able to perceive more related to UAPs. That was the Gary Nolan research. So I just wanted to throw that out there as another consideration that, we have to also think about this culturally when we're talking about consciousness. Other people have been attached and are totally connected to UAP. Okay.
This one is for Christopher Sharp. Maybe Courtney could read this one in some sort of Alaskan accent. I don't know what they talk like up there.
Does Christopher know the research that Richard D. Hall from UK in his work in trying to put out info, eh?
Okay, there you go. There's your Alaskan accent.
Weak sauce. I'm better at Howard Cosell.
Oh, I'm better at Howard Cosell.
This
No
is
question
Howard
about it.
Cosell.
Okay.
Go
ahead, Chris.
No, I've heard the name before, but I've never actually looked into it. Apologies. Yeah, it's something I should obviously really read up on. So yeah, let me look more into that. Definitely. Thank you for putting it out there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll say earlier, just to answer the question about what the administration's gonna do, I'll say this, and this is not only for this administration. This is apolitical because we don't do politics on CAB. Is they're going to look at? They're probably going to say, "You bring me a PowerPoint. I want you to bring me papers. I want you to bring me analysis on how this is going to help me, how this is going to help our administration." And if they think there be an effect on the economy that's negative, or banking, or interest rates, or international banking, if they think that there's going to be some sort of a negative effect on what they're going to be graded on, which are some of those things I just talked about mainly, then they may not disclose anything. And this is not a statement about President Trump, because every president from now until Harry Truman has not disclosed anything. So this is not a statement about one president. It's a statement about every single one of them. So even even if he has the bully pulpit and could slam down his gavel and say, I want to start firing people until I get to the people who knows about this program, well, that would be one way that he could get to it, right? But if he thinks it will negatively reflect negatively on his presidency, especially from a financial or an economic aspect, or something where there would be any sort of hysteria or anything that he can't be proven to his satisfaction, then he's not going to release it. I don't care if there's 24 advocates for UFOs in his cabinet. That is the calculus that he's going to use, and that's probably the calculus that every single one of them used. Now, there may be different variations because some of them are much more about national security. Others may be more concerned with the economy. So I think that's the calculus that's going to be used and will determine whether or not anything will be released, frankly. Anyone want to comment on that?
I think that's really, really good. That's really, really good analysis there. Yeah, there are lots of repercussions that need to be thought about here, especially with the financial markets, I believe. Yeah, definitely.
And Chris, I think you can validate the fact that my face doesn't actually look this fat in person, right? Like it's the camera.
No, it's absolutely fine. Your face looks absolutely wonderful.
All right, cool. Thank you. How will this serve me? Yeah, I mean, it's just like, again, I mean, this is not some sort of an indictment on this administration. This is what every administration has done, and it may be slightly variations in their reasons, but it all comes back to something to do with the economy, national security, the way their presidency is viewed writ large. It also could be people from inside the established, what would we call them, bureaucrats that are sort of holding the information. They're saying, hey, Mr. President, those of you who are going to go brief the Mr. President, if this information gets out, these are the ramifications that could result. They could have to do with our competitors. They're global power competitors, Russia and China. So there may be a myriad of reasons, but something thereof. So let's see. Sarah Shock and Horror has a question. Then we got Anthony. So somebody want to take this one, please?
I'll do it.
Do presidents even
Debs.
have the clear? Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. It's fine. Go ahead.
We got another one for you, Debs, next. So go ahead, Tort.
Do presidents even have the clearance to know the information in the files? My guess is no.
No, they do. They absolutely do, because they are the original. They're like the OCA, the original classification authority. They can declassify anything that they so choose. But in theory, you would be right, Sarah, because they are not going through, like when we had Jim Semivan on the program, we hadn't had Dave Grush, but these people have had multiple lifestyle polygraphs, because you have kind of like a mission polygraph that's going to get into your ability to keep secrets and your thoughts about the mission and all this. And then the lifestyle polygraph is extremely invasive, where they can ask you anything about your life from beginning to end, any sort of deviancy that you have they could dig into. And how you respond to that will determine whether or not you're issued that clearance. They do not get that. They do not go through that background investigation. They are just blessed on an inauguration day. So, and then there's another question here in all caps, and maybe Debs could read this one from Anthony Miller. There you go, Miller. We've got your question, Miller. Go ahead,
There
Debs.
have been others, like Julia Mossbridge, who also seem to suggest that certain psi capacities, RV in her case, or Heiss in Jake's story, are only successful from a place of love. What do you think? And for those who don't know, there's definitely people out there who don't know what those things mean. They're
Go ahead,
saying
please.
psychic capacities, remote viewing in her case, or human and contact, basically, that's initiated with like a ritual or procedure. They're attempting to contact entities when they do heists.
Give it up for my homegirl Debs right there. Man. Come on. Amen, girlfriend. All right, go ahead. Who wants to respond to that? Is Chris or anybody?
I mean, for me, it's seems all about like resonance and frequency and vibrations that you're kind of putting out there, perhaps. I mean, this is all kind of like really new to me. I get the feeling that someone within a classified part of government knows the science behind this and how it works. I'm just waiting for that to come out because obviously there is, and something has been buried underground. So I would like to know that.
Court and Court, Debs, and Nathan, all just if you want to give your take on this one. Sua Sponte, we're going to talk to you about that, homegirl, because these people are from Free Karen Reed, but they have, some of them have had UFO experiences, and I think that's why they're here. And Sua Sponte is one of them. So, but go ahead. Would you like to take a shot at this one, Court, Nathan, Deb?
Yeah, I'll take a shot. And first of all, Anthony, appreciate you joining the chat. Anthony just launched a podcast recently called Obliterate the Construct, which is great, and talking about tackling these very topics. So great to have you with the show tonight. I think we're entering into an interesting time, right? So I've talked about this recently, and I think that we're living in the midst of a paradigm shift. And I think that the 20th century sort of is, we saw kind of the golden age of rationalism, and we're in sort of also the waning age of the waning time of that. And so now we're looking at a time period where we're re-examining some of the things that we quote unquote discarded as supernatural. And we're starting to take a fresh look at those things because they kind of have tie-ins with things like quantum mechanics and aspects of reality that we don't really understand very well. And so I find it very fascinating that that love is it seemed to be a common thread in a lot of these contact experiences, particularly with the CU5 or the heist protocols. Love seems to be very, highly connected to those experiences. There's something about that expression, right? So what is that? And to me, this is exciting because it does give us a chance to re-examine our humanity in a way that I think we have discarded for a very long time. We've tend to sort of bucket all of these emotional experiences as just like, well, that's kind of woo-woo stuff that we don't want to deal with. We're really just highly rational animals. And the more rational we can be, the more computer-like we can become, the closer we're going to get to discoveries and knowledge and understanding how reality actually is, et cetera, et cetera. And what if, in fact, this aspect of ourselves is wrapped up in all of that and is important to our understanding of knowledge and truth and all of those things. So I think it's truly exciting. And I think we need to be open to the possibilities that who you are as a person, and this is a crazy concept, who you are as a person, how you comport yourself in the world, how you approach reality, how you treat other people, does happen to have some sort of correlation to whatever this phenomena might be, however it expresses itself in the world. A lot of things that are wrapped up in that. That's not to say, and I want to make sure to make this point, that it's all love and light and sunshine and rainbows. We know there are lots of experiences that run counter to this kind of love message. And I think that is a trap that we fall into, where we tend to sort of flatten a lot of these experiences into one category. And it seems to be, based on the body of evidence that we have and encounters, et cetera, that there are lots of different kind of competing groups and elements at work here. Just like, as Chris pointed out earlier, lots of different human components to it. Like, we're not all the same kinds of human. We don't all behave in the same way. Some of us are really benevolent. Some of us are downright evil. And I think that's probably just a fact of the way life happens to be everywhere else. So anyway, fascinating question, Anthony. Really appreciate you posing that.
Yeah, Court, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm going in new directions with my philosophical thoughts about the NHI, and kind of radical, I guess, in a sense, where I'm coming from it from a cultural standpoint of indigenous communities who have been talking about things like the ancestors, right? And the ancestors and who they are, and ancestors and sometimes born within us. And so I'm exploring this topic in terms of NHI because I do feel this is the way the trend might go. And I do think some part of that is psionic or consciousness, or even in lucid dream states that we receive contact, from the ancestors. So I'm taking it even further. And I think that I've said this to a couple people. I think ASI is gonna disclose NHI and what it is. So I'm pretty far out there on the fringe and the curve of some of my own predictions. But when I think about heis or psi or psionics, which I kind of think of as an older term to describe, psychic functioning, I'm starting to think about NHI in very different terms from how I have in the past. And so as well as those terms, I'm also trying to think differently about we as humans and spirit and how we commingle within ourselves, and that the NHI might actually be part of us. So I'm looking at that in different terms, and I think you need to be careful about those kind of terms, but I'm trying to just upend all my own learnings about what NHI really is and think about it differently, turn it upside down a little bit.
That's a great way to do it. It's, not only, because you have to like challenge your own assumptions and your own beliefs. And like I've said, since we started CAB, if you're at the exact same place that you are when we started, then you probably haven't been paying very close attention to any thought processes that have advanced in the community, or thought leaders that have come and given us information, or experiencers, specifically experiencers. But Debs, what are your thoughts, my friend?
I wanted to say that from my understanding, it is not simply about love. It's definitely not. In fact, the majority of psychic abilities that I've heard about have to do more with survival. So, for instance, someone has gone through a trauma experience and suddenly they've heightened psychic abilities. Um, People who have died come back with immense psychic abilities. So I think there's a biological element that has to do with our survival. Just like, we know birds migrate based on magnetic fields that we cannot perceive. I think it's just a very innate part of us that we need to accept and acknowledge as just a part of who we are. Um, I would actually just put something on X about research that's been done on people being able to smell when someone is going to die, and
Yes,
also smell
dogs
that.
too.
Yeah, and well, yeah, definitely animals are much better at this than we are. For sure. They know when someone's sick. They can tell when someone's upset. They're way more accepting of this concept than we are, but it is part of us. And I think there's a biological element to it. And I also think that when we understand the quantum a little better, we'll understand what's going on a little better, because I still think it's very much about light, frequency, and sound. So,
Oh, that's one of your favorites.
yep.
Light, frequency, and sound. What's up, girlfriend?
Yeah, that's a
Um,
physical thing that is definitely a part of it, in my opinion.
I want to say we are 40 subscribers away now from 7,000. So if you're not subscribed to CAB, and you guys have done great in the last, 4 or 5 months, we've gotten about 3,000 subscribers. If you can get us to 7,000, that would be really dope. So if you could hit subscribe button, I really appreciate it. This is Marky O'Boyle, our homie right here. Hi, Mark. How are you? BBC had a Carol King. Yes, no, I totally understand. Carol King and her, I think her thing on BBC might have had James Taylor also accompanying her, which is really dope. So I don't blame you for watching that. This is Debs. Those of you who want to follow Debs, who you just heard spoke, it's at Study of UAPs on Twitter. And someone just welcomed in New Jersey Cowboys. I think that's Chris Albert. I'm not sure, but if so, welcome Chris Albert, if that is you. Anyway, nobody else here is going to get that except for Courtney, but that's okay. Anyway, I would like to speak to Christopher Sharp, though. Believe it or not, he's our guest today, even though we've spoken as much as he has. Hopefully he doesn't mind that, though. If not, then do you mind that we spoke a lot?
No, I'm just going to exit the interview now. Yeah, just of course not. No, you guys are fantastic. The thing is, like, I find the topic is really getting out of my kind of like comfort zone now and my area of expertise in terms of like consciousness, and what you guys bring to the table in terms of your understanding is quite enlightening. It gives me like real food for thought, and you know, yeah, it really does. There's a reason why people like knee deep in these programs and stuff do get interested in these topics. So yeah, I can't rule it out. You know, my brother has experienced like strange experiences. My mum does, and my aunt does. My cousin does. I've never been privy to that. You know, so you know, this is part of like why I'm interested in it. So I really, really enjoy just kind of like the expertise that you have on this panel, and yeah, I think it brings like a real holistic kind of like view of the topic, which is really, really helpful both to me and to your audience as well. No, so thank you. I think it's fantastic.
And well, thank you for those comments. And by the way, it's not even really our panel. It's just, this is our show. These are cabbies. So we're really blessed to have them. And that's what the result, you know, our new fans who weren't familiar with Debs and Nathan and Courtney were just kind of like, wow, man, these guys are really dope. So I have a question for you. And then Mick has a question. Mick is, of course, from England, like yourself. I wish he had a Cockney accent, though. I want to picture him with a Cockney accent. I love those. But Chris, so, you know, of the archetype that we spoke of that represents those Delta Force soldiers, it represents the 24th STS airmen, and it represents Jake Barber, who is really this hybrid, undercover, well-trained special operations airman, but that was masquerading as an aircraft mechanic, which is like, I've got questions that I got to get to from you to Ross about that, because I want to know how he kept that cover amongst the aircraft maintenance guys and how that would come to fruition. If he went TDY, would he say goodbye to the maintenance guys? I'll see you guys in 3 or 4 days. I got to go do reconnaissance. Or so I've got questions about his cover. Not that I don't believe him, but just questions. But have you been contacted by, let's say, Special Air Service members, Special Boat Service members, any of your kind of their brethren in the UK forces that would be your tier one? Have you been contacted by anybody?
No, not personally, but from my understanding, under kind of like the umbrella of you know, Five Eyes, let's say, that there have been missions that have taken place, retrieval missions involving like tier one UK operators, and also it's kind of good, nice and gratifying to hear that, you know, JSOC is involved in these retrievals, and you know, especially hearing the 24th STS as well, because that's what we really kind of like. One of the things that we focused on when we did the Office of Global Access story, and it's been said to me that, you know, that they're really part of this whole kind of like legacy program from the beginning. I mean, STS has been around under some guys for decades now, so it's been part of like retrieval missions for some time. And it was also said to me that, you know, they were involved potentially in the Rendlesham incident as well, although back then they were known as Brand X. So that's something that I'm still investigating as well. So yeah, I just find it really, really interesting how these missions kind of like get put together, and it's something I'm still learning about.
But these guys are not coming forward. That you
No,
to you at least.
Not to me. Okay. No.
All right, Chris, could you read this one, but in a British accent that isn't yours? So another regional accent.
There is a Liberation Times article. I can't do Northern Irish.
You had it. It was there. I heard it, man.
That was pretty good. Yeah, that was pretty good.
We used to do like my friend always used to joke around about a colleague that he had called Linda, who was from Northern Ireland. Mm-hmm. And when we went to Paris, like he was pretending to do like French with Northern Ireland accent, like Le Voudre Linder, something like that. And then like, and I joked around about that in the office in my former agency. And then like a few weeks ago, one of my former colleagues sent me a message on Instagram, and it was like a clip that went viral about like a Northern Irish like rugby manager who was doing a team talk in French because he was managing a French team. It was quite funny because he had such a strong Northern Irish accent speaking in French. It was I love it. It was a good one.
How about the Geordie? Can you do a Geordie or anything?
Oh, I don't want to. I don't want to offend people.
All right, go ahead. You can just do it in your own British accent. That's fine. You can read it in your own accent.
We've got lovely people like Graham who live that part of the country. And if I do a Geordie accent, it might be mocking and stuff like that. Like there was always like a famous sitcom called Alan Partridge, and he had a Geordie friend, and he used to be in the army, and he couldn't understand a lot of what he was saying because it was like real Geordie, like old style Geordie, and it's like what? But that's part of the beauty of the UK, you know, so many regional accents and stuff, which is great.
Love it. All right, go ahead, read this one in your own British accent. That shouldn't be too hard for you. Go ahead.
There is a Liberation Times article from December 14th, 2021, where the alleged occupants of a flying wing craft found in Italy were addressed. Many people write this event as a hoax. What's your take? Again, you know, these allegations that I consider from serious people. I mean, there's been a debate, I believe, in Italy as well, among like people interested in the UAP topic and who investigate it, of whether this was a hoax and whether these kind of like memos from the Mussolini era were real or not. But I mean, what we did is when the David Grush allegations came out, this really lovely guy from Italy who, I mean, I remember when I was putting out the Magenta story, there was like one comment on X about this guy. He said, "Oh, my great grandfather or something like that was a podester at the time," and no one ever like saw it or caught onto it. But I always remembered it in my head. So when the Dave Grush story came out, I got in touch with this guy again, and through myself and my co-writer for the Daily Mail, Josh Boswell, were able to kind of like vet the story and like prove that his granddad was a podesta, which is basically like the head kind of like, I believe, like police or secret police person like in a region of Italy. And the story was always told throughout his family that, you know, the great grandfather had said that something had crashed in 1933, and that was like separate, and that was before, you know, like this story kind of like went viral. So that was always a story. So for me, that kind of like lended some credibility behind the story that you had someone separate come out about that. So yeah, I think there might be something behind it. I mean, there's the allegation, you know, that I think I wrote about as well, that the Italians and Germans were working on reverse engineering this craft, and during World War II, and that effort after the war went to Wright Field, where they worked with an American team, continuing those efforts. So you know, there's stuff I didn't report on that I couldn't corroborate as part of my story, but you know, you have to think, you know, the timing is quite interesting, you know, especially if they were trying to reverse engineer this craft. You know, they may have been testing it out as well, let's say. So if they were kind of like testing a prototype, you know, that could have occurred around 1947 time. What crashed in 1947? What was taken back to Wright Field in 1947? I don't know. It always makes you think, you know, was the Roswell crash perhaps like a reverse? You know, was one of, because it seemed like there were two objects involved, but, you know, was one of them kind of like a potential American asset that kind of like originated from German and Italian efforts? I mean, that's something that's been put on the table. Yeah.
Well, the metallurgy of a craft like that would be very, very obvious what it was. So first of all, if you had something like a disc, there's very few ways that they would have figured out to power something like that at that time. Even looking at the most brilliant mind they had in Germany was Werner von Braun. And what the hell technology was he using? Rocket technology. What technology are they using today? Rocket technology with SpaceX. So it's the same technology. So I don't think it was a reverse engineered craft, because making something like that fly, we discussed this years ago on Cab, it would have to be like a flying gas can, because in order to project that much energy, even to make something hover and then to fly forward, let's say that you could do that, the whole thing would have to be made of fuel. I mean, you wouldn't even be able to have a person in it. Then when it crashes and you go to pick it up, the most distinctive thing that the people who picked those material up with said, this is not material we've ever seen before. It's very strong, but you can fold it and it goes back into shape. Well, the metallurgical aspects or properties of that metal would have been familiar to any American metallurgist that would have looked at it. So it wouldn't be something exotic that they couldn't explain. And the whole thing that people don't get about Roswell is that if it's a weather balloon, which none of us believe that, only just the biggest idiots and debunkers in the community believe that, that it was a weather balloon. But if beyond that, even if it were a craft of some sort, there would be things about it that people could look at and touch and say, this is made of very similar metal properties as what an aircraft is made out of, like a wing segment, or even at that time, if titanium were at that time. So that's why I don't think that in the late 40s, you would have had something that would have flown like that people couldn't recognize as human built. That's what, when people see one of these things, you kind of like, even when you see a UFO, and there's been a couple of people in the chat now that have seen them, not the least of which is David. But when you see it, you kind of know that you're seeing something that's just out of this. Courtney's seen one, it's out of this world. I've seen one, when I was a boy. So it's one of those things. And now if you're actually able to pick it up and examine it and touch it, and there's occupants and the most of it is still intact, you're going to be able to see if that's human made. And you talk to people like Gary Nolan, and he talks about isotopic ratios and things like that are just were not possible at that time. And even today would be, you might have to create some of these parts in a space environment, in a vacuum free environment. Anyway, yes, sir.
No, I agree. I agree. That's a good point. And, I wasn't able to corroborate anything around that. But what I find interesting as well is that, from kind of like my own sources, there's one camp that kind of like says it was kind of like, they were testing some kind of like radar weapon or something like that, which brought two objects down. And then there's another kind of like set of events in that there was like a dogfight, and that's what happened. And that's how two craft kind of like went down as well. And I found that quite interesting because we had the Jake Barber interview, and he was like saying that it looked like
microwave
there were dogfighting. So it's interesting to consider every eventuality in terms of what may have happened there.
It's getting those shapes to take flight is something, and he alluded to something that there have been at least one aerospace company that is re-engineered at least one craft to be able to fly, or reverse engineered or something like that. And let's say that that's the case. But in the 1940s, to make something fly, irrespective, outside the framework of what we know are the properties of Newton's laws of physics and Bernoulli's theorem and the type of propulsion that was available back then, I've had somebody that tell me that they thought that was a Nazi craft, and I'm just like, I'm sorry. I just don't think that would have been possible back then. But is it possible that they've reverse engineered some sort of craft and they're able to fly it? Sure. I guess that's possible.
Can I comment on the Nazi thing real quick, if you don't mind?
Sure.
The Army has a PDF where they investigated some of the early accounts of UAPs that were being seen. It's a very lengthy PDF that a lot of people ignore, that is available in the Department of Defense's collection in the FOIA room, essentially. And it is all about them going to Germany and trying to talk to people and find out what it was that Kenneth Arnold saw, and determining essentially that it was not the flying wing and it was not from the Nazis. Okay, I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, it's just somebody would have to convince me that they were able to propulse something, fuel, propulse, and fly and overcome gravity of something in the 40s like that. And I can just tell you from my knowledge in aerospace, I don't buy it. And if somebody shows me something that changed my mind, I'm open to changing my mind, but not happening. Because of just a helicopter alone. First of all, we didn't even have rotary wing aircraft in the 40s. So just, kind of, that was like the early days of Igor Sikorsky. So to take something that you would have to be able to hover and then make it fly would be an absolutely enormous Herculean feat at that time. And it would have, Again, and if you crashed it, you'd look at it and you would understand that it has some sort of a gas turbine powered engine that made it lift off if you did that. And it would have to be, you wouldn't be able to go very far with it because of the amount of fuel that it would take. I want to also say with one thing about singular sightings and then UFO incidents like what was seen by, Jake Barber or any of these guys. What you're trying to do is to triangulate information. So Chris wrote a story on Magenta, Italy. And what does he have to triangulate that? Well, he has Lou Elizondo and his sources. Then he has the actual writings in Italian from the time that they've captured. And there's the Italian journalists that have spoke to that. And then you have David Grush. So now you can triangulate that information and say, okay, now I have at least 3 sources to put this together that yes, there was a craft that crashed in Magenta, Italy in something like 33. And then it after the war was translated to the States. When you have a singular event, like what happened to Jim Semivan, we don't have we can't triangulate that story and say, okay, it has to be true. We have to trust that based on Jim and his clearance that he's telling the truth, just like anybody, like Courtney's UFO story, driving with her daughter to college. We have Courtney and we trust Courtney. So we have a tendency that we're going to believe what she's saying, even though we can't triangulate it. With Jake Barber, because if he just told that story, okay, Jake, that's great. We've never heard of this program you were in, where you were undercover. We don't know anything. Your GD214 doesn't even say some of these things that you say. So it's great. But now when you have other tier 1 soldiers and airmen that are coming, now we can triangulate that story and say, now we have something valid here. Now we have something we can sink our teeth into. And that is what makes this story extraordinary. The difficulty people have with Dave is that, and I don't have any difficulties with Dave Grush whatsoever, is that he came out his story, and really you have Carl Nell that said, okay, this guy's legitimate, but there hasn't necessarily been a triangulation. But then again, Lou Elizondo has said, I worked in a jock with Dave, and and also Dave briefed President Trump, during his last administration. So that's kind of what you're looking for when you're trying to evaluate. And Jake Barber has that triangulation of folks that are coming out to support him.
I just wanted to mention, DJ, that you talked about the Italians. I just wanted to mention Paolo Gizzardo. He's one of the experts, so for people who want to look up, contacts in Italy, I know he's available to discuss with people. Just a little reference.
Say that again. I'm sorry. I was reading this about Italy. What'd you say? I'm sorry. Say that again.
Paolo Gizzardo is one of the Italian experts. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, so that right there, I mean, you have a pretty good and guys, let me know in the chat if I've missed anything for Sharpie. And we'll get back to it. I know Sue is saying that she had I think, and Sue has actually said that she saw a flying saucer also. Let's go around the room. Let's see what else we got for Sharp, and then we'll get him out of here because we've already kept them 15 minutes over.
Yeah, I have a question, Chris. So you're very well aware that the UFO, allegedly, the UFO programs have been siloed. That there are various different efforts to understand these objects and the craft and the materials and all. So these different programs are heavily siloed, kind of like the Manhattan Project, that they may not necessarily know what the other side is doing. Does that, in your opinion, make it pretty challenging to piece together a coherent narrative of what, in fact, it is we are dealing with? And I wonder if that is also part of the complication with UFO disclosure. And here I'm thinking with the Schumer amendment, this UAP review board, kind of collating this information, trying to make sense of it all. I am of the opinion that with more folks coming out, like Jake Barber and others, we're going to get almost, I don't want to say competing narratives. We're going to get some different kinds of lanes of information because these programs didn't really talk to each other. And so How do you think that that's going to be? What kind of challenge does that pose to someone who's trying to cover this, or even to trying to explain it to the American people or the world? What kind of challenge does that pose to kind of putting it all together?
Yeah, it's really difficult and complex. Like when I start last year, I was reporting on the Office of Science and Weapons Research, and how it got custody, basically historically, allegedly, of the Magenta craft, which is when, from my understanding, when an element of the Manhattan Project was transferred to the Central Intelligence Group, which was precursor to the CIA. So then you're just tracking the history of what it was, what happened, how its name changed, all through the years, basically. So there's that element to consider, and then you see that these materials that Lockheed had, they originated and they belong to the CIA's Office of Science and Technology. But then, from my understanding now, the craft that get retrieved now are actually they belong to the DoD. That's the custody. But then the propulsion system gets studied by elements within the DOE, and they all have different roles to play. And if the Office of Scientific and Weapons Research is called upon to help, they will. But otherwise, they can't really get access unless asked by the DoD requesting help. So the CIA basically used to be the only game, or one of the only games in town, I guess, with the most power back in the late 1940s, early 1950s. But since then, there's so many different kind of like players involved now in terms of the UAP stuff, like the combat support kind of like agencies as well, like the NRO, NGA, and stuff like that. So it's really, really complex from what I hear in terms of how these things are done, and the role that's played by kind of like each like element of the government and stuff. So it can get really, really complex. And then obviously as well, you look at the contractors involved and how they're put in charge of projects and stuff. And from my understanding, the US Air Force and the CIA have been working a long time on this. They have an agreement whereby the CIA transfers these craft to US Air Force contractors. But then again, it changes, the dynamic changes when you conduct maritime missions, and it's all dependent on whether the craft, and what its capabilities are and stuff, like was mentioned in one of the congressional hearings, they have to make a decision of what contractor to send it to. So if it does kind of like have underwater capabilities that are very advanced, you might send it to General Dynamics, for instance. It's so sorry, I go down such a hole here. It's so nuanced.
Dig it, man. Dig it.
I mean, it's almost like we kind of have to expect there to be some confounding components here, because it's sort of like the blind man and the elephant story, right? You've got all these different agencies that are addressing certain aspects of the program. Those agencies have their own culture, have their own perspective. They tend to want to look at things from a specific angle. And so their interpretation of that material, whatever it is that they're focused on, could be entirely different than another agency's interpretation. And so it makes it very difficult for the public to kind of then go, well, what is the truth? Does anyone have a fulsome picture of what this all is? And I'm curious, do you think there is anyone or any group that may have that more fulsome picture of what this all is?
I think in terms of like understanding of origin, intent, and questions like that, the things that the public are really interested in, I think that will be the CIA. CIA's task would be kind of like to find out, to answer those questions. Where do they originate from? Who are the controllers? What do they want? What is their intent with us? And if there are different kind of like species and factions that have actually been like uncovered, it's up to the CIA to kind of like classify those. I suppose that would be its prime mission. So I think in terms of understanding of who the non-human intelligences are and what their intent is, and their origin and stuff like that. I think CIA would be a good bet in terms of its mission, kind of like answering those questions. But then again, if you're interested in the questions about the technology and stuff like that, it will be the DoD and the DOE, the national labs, and the contractors. So, but yeah, I'd also add this. It's no coincidence that Steve Justice kind of like got into this topic, joining TTSA. And TTSA had this kind of vision to build, their own kind of like craft. So why would Steve Justice from Lockheed Skunk Works go along with this mad thing to kind of like reverse engineer and bring out a technology based on non-human technology and stuff like that if it didn't exist? Like, he's a serious guy, so why would he go along with that if it didn't exist? So yeah, kind of like add more weight to what Jake Barber was saying as well, in that they have kind of made some kind of like big strides reverse engineering the craft. So yeah, that's interesting as well.
And could you answer this one, Chris? Because I mean, we know that you're a journalist, but Sua Sponte is got some kind of like she's not aware of you because she's from the Karen Reed community, legal community. So what would you call your specialty? Maybe you could just tell people about what it is that you do.
Yeah, so I'm a journalist from Liberation Times. I also am a contributor for the Daily Mail as well. And what I do is I look to where I can break new stories on the UFO topic, in terms of what whistleblowers are saying, in terms of what's happening in Congress right now. For instance, we had a conversation a while ago, didn't we, DJ, about certain members of Congress, perhaps on the intelligence community, feeling fearful.
Holy shit! You freaked me out, man, when you reported that. Freaked me out. Yes, go ahead.
So I just have to remind people when I got something right, because a lot of people always kind of like, he doesn't get anything right. Come on, we had that conversation, but I think we both raised some really good points about that, and I think that's kind of being backed up now by Barber's testimony. So I try to break stories that what's going on behind the scenes at the moment. A lot of it is like intuitive as well. Like my breakthrough article kind of like was a story that got picked up by Christopher Mellon and Lou Elizondo, and they retweeted it back in like a few years ago now. Might have been 2021. And that article came about because I just kind of like had this need to write something, because I was feeling really strongly about the AOI-MSG and the Gillibrand Amendment. So you just have this feeling, and you write it, and then you go to bed, and then you wake up the next day, you've got lots of messages from people saying, wow, what an article, and Chris Mellon's wanting to retweet it and stuff like that. And you're like, what is happening to my life? And then the next moment, you've got people wanting you on podcasts and stuff like that. So you go from kind of like nothing and not really well known to kind of like all of a sudden like, oh, who's this person? And the first Liberation Times articles didn't even have my name on because I didn't want to be anyone. I didn't want to be known. I just wanted to provide good information. And it's kind of got out of control, I guess.
No, it's well in control, and you are beloved. I mean, when you get to be as good as Chris is, you're going to have haters in the community that are going to say, oh, his information crap, or isn't, they're going to try to tear him down because they know that he's breaking stories. Like I said, he can actually have comms with people at the Pentagon, with Susan Goff, people that we wish on this panel here that we wish we could contact on, but they do answer Chris. So that means that he's resonating with them. I also want to say, just to summarize what he was getting at before, like if you're wondering why this is something that Chris broke that I never even considered, never even thought of this. And he said that if you're wondering why some of your elected representatives who are interested in UFOs have had to back off in certain circumstances, and I'm not accusing anything, I'm just saying, what if there were certain agencies that were to contact that member of Congress and say, if you push too hard on this subject, it would be really awful if information about you would be released to the public. And if you're a politician, you are going to back right the hell off if you have anything to hide at all, and most people do. So, so I'll just leave it at that. I'll just leave it at that without any further attribution. Debs, what do you got for Christopher?
Before I ask my question, I just have to comment and ask the chat to be respectful to people who have had experiences and encounters. I've noticed some comments in the chat that are meant to be funny, but they can be hurtful to someone who's had an experience. So, okay, so
Yes.
I just wanted to ask Chris, since obviously I came from a place of research with this. Every single thing related to this topic has documented evidence connected to it. Underground bases, the reconnaissance missions to collect objects that have fallen, objects that have come from space that have been collected under programs like moon dust, so on and so forth. All of these things have evidence connected to them. Why do you think people just still cannot handle it, cannot believe it, despite all that evidence?
Yeah. So I mean, retrieval missions and stuff like that. That is a fact. Most of the time it's kind of like adversary systems and stuff like that. This is a fact. These, the JSOC and CIA connection. It really exists. But mostly for kind of like stuff that we know what it is. So it just seems that some of the time this stuff we don't know what it is, and it's been said to me is that some of this stuff is deorbited, does come from space, which is wow. And underground bases as well. You asked about that too, and I think that's really, really interesting. I remember not that it necessarily had to do anything about UAPs at all, but there was a story back in 2004 about some British special forces, I believe, who'd come to Mexico just like as tourists, and that's how they got into the country. And they were basically caught in a cave system, and they had actually got stranded there. And the Mexican authorities were like really angry, and it caused like a huge like diplomatic row between Mexico and the UK at the time. And it kind of like made you kind of question, like, what were these like British special forces personnel doing in these caves in the first place in Mexico? Like, why were they there? And they wouldn't accept help at all from the Mexicans. They didn't want them knowing what they were doing. So yeah, you always hear stuff like that, and you hear about as well. It's like underground systems, potentially like in the mountains, in the kind of like the Pyrenees area between France and Spain. And it had been said to me as well that there's like a link to this as well in terms of like Rh negative blood, and like when you look at the concentration of people who are Rh negative, a lot of them kind of like live in that Basque area, which is nearby. So I don't know, like the way that I kind of like look at this story, is I kind of like contemplate everything. And if I can corroborate them one day and get serious sources to like back it up and provide me like meat on the bone, then I can report them, to my audience and inform them. But I like to contemplate all these angles. I've always got them in my head, and I try never to rule anything out, because straight away, like a lot of the journalists, like in the UFO community, who've been involved previously, have kind of like rubbished kind of like the Eric Davis stuff, and the Davis meeting that he had with Admiral Wilson. They've rubbished legacy programs and stuff like that, and they've just ruled them out, and they put themselves in the corner. They're like, this can't happen. This isn't what my sources in the Pentagon are telling me, and stuff like that. So they kind of like dug their own graves and stuff. But you should never do that. I don't think you should ever rule anything out or dispute something or say that person's lying or this person's lying, because the facts can always change. So it's always good never to rule anything out, but always be on the lookout for data and corroboration. So I hope that answered your question. So I didn't want to go too off the path there.
It's not bad, mate. So we've got this one from Patty Murphy. I'm fascinated by this topic. Please have more shows on this subject. I'd love to share the story that I was told by someone. It involves crafts regularly coming out of the water in Hawaii. That's my Irish accent right there. Is that okay, Chris?
Yeah, it's a really good one. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Rob, though, our friend Rob probably would want to slap me in the face right now. But But anyway, Patty, yeah, we will do more, and it would be great. Yeah, we'd love to have on a panel of listeners talk about their experiences. And I want to let you know, Patty, that everybody on this channel has had talked to people about USOs, which basically undersea submersible, unknowns. What is USOs again? Is it undersea submersible objects?
Underwater.
Unknown submersible objects.
This is one of my favorite things to point out, but they change what that means all the time. Submersible, submerged,
transmedium.
So yes, there we go.
Yeah, craft that can go into the water and have been spotted by naval personnel at I don't know, 500 knots or something like that, which we don't have anything that could, any kind of craft that could move underwater with hydrodynamic drag at that level. So yeah, we've all heard of USOs, and Tim Gallaudet, the admiral, one-star admiral that testified before Congress, has taken at least one, maybe two reports of USOs during his Navy career. So anyway, thank you, Patty Murphy. Court, did you have a final question for there she goes.
I do. I do. It's a bit off the wall. And the only thing I can say, it's just thinking about the Alaskan impersonation would be, oh geez, I'm just a hockey mom. I'm just a hockey mom. And I can see Russia. I can see Russia from my backyard. Yeah, that might be the best Alaskan, I can do today. All right, this is an off-the-wall question, Chris, but I know you're going to get it because you're in the field. You're doing it. So you're in the trenches. So a lot of the people from the agency, from the CIA, who have come out, this kind of dovetails a little bit with Nathan's question, but goes into the weeds. These guys have had experiences. They've had experiences on the job. They've had experiences in the field. And whether they're involved with the science and technology or whatever department they're in, they tend to, come out and share experiences, whether it's Jim Semivan or John Ramirez or, Steve, who we all know. So I'm just wondering, when you're working with sources, and I'm not, asking you to give up any sources or methods or anything, but when you're working with people who were former agency, CIA particularly, do you find that some of them or many of them have had experiences with NHI, and they, in their narratives or in their discussions, they bring that to your attention or to the fore?
Yeah, I think a lot of the people I do speak to from the intelligence community do have these experiences. I believe there was someone as well on the USS, was it the Theodore Roosevelt, which was involved in some of the East Coast incidents. An intelligence officer on there had kind of experiences as well. So yeah, I do find that, and especially when you're taking into account people working in the CIA. I mean, these are gifted individuals to get where they are in the first place, and the CIA is looking for people who aren't just intelligent. They've got to have something else. They've got to think outside the box and become extraordinary. And I was thinking the other day, actually, a lot of people and to stigmatize people that have had experiences and stuff like that. But when you look back at history, you think of Joan of Arc, has an experience, a religious experience as a young girl, and it transforms her, and then she goes on to become a great leader and beat back us English from France, and you have stuff like that. That's a real world situation. It just so happens she was inspired by that. Or you look at Oliver Cromwell, who got the king beheaded and started the Civil War and became the Lord Protector of England, and you look through his biography, and he said that he had voices in his head and stuff like that, and God spoke to him, and every if you were to look at his diary and stuff like that, it would all be about probably having voices in his head and stuff like that, and thinking that God's telling him to do something that's his mission and stuff like that. So a lot of people have had spiritual experiences who have gone on to do great things, and it's just accepted that this is part of history in terms of these experiences that they've had, you know. So the modern day kind of interpretation of that is kind of like to do with UAP, I guess, isn't it? So I don't know why we stigmatize that, because we know that there's evidence that spiritual experiences do happen, and they've kind of like played a major role in history in shaping the world that we live in today. So I always think about that. And, you know, I think Deb as well mentioned about experiences before as well, that we shouldn't, you know, we've got to be respectful towards them. And I wholly agree. You know, I remember speaking to Peter Corey, the Australian experiencer, you know, and you see the impact that it had on his life in terms of having that experience. You know, the guy went on TV, he did a lie detector test. You know, he found, like, I think it was 2 hairs as well from this being, one of the beings that visited him, got it tested. It's turned out to be quite extraordinary. But, you know, you find out that his kids suffered from bullying at school and stuff from that, and his life, nothing good of that came from his, you know, came of that for him. You know, it made his life a lot harder. And this is why many people that do have experiences haven't spoken out. And I believe that there are members of Congress as well that are experiences that haven't come out as well. You know, just from my perspective, just because I haven't been an experiencer, like many others do, you know, and many others basically will just make fun of them and stuff like that because it's not happened in their life before. But that's like a really, really dangerous path to go on, you know. This is kind of how we got ourselves involved with the initial response in COVID, you know, because a lot of people didn't take it seriously at first, you know, when it came to COVID, because it had never happened in their experience before. They had never experienced a pandemic before. So because it had never happened in their life before, it was outside their experience, they didn't take it seriously. And I think the same thing applies to UAP as well. Just because you haven't experienced in your life before doesn't mean that it's not real. And it's a psychological trap that people fall into, I feel.
Chris, this last one, Sua Sponte asked about if you had been threatened. I told her that you had. And then this is her follow-up. I don't know how deep you want to go on this, if at all, but I want to throw this out there. This will be the last question.
Yeah, I've been told that there have been threats and that I was treading in dangerous territory with what I'm doing, especially with certain stories that I've reported on. And it said to me that, you know, some of the people that you might be reporting on could potentially be involved with wet works, which is basically assassinations and stuff like that. And you're dealing with serious people. That's what I've been told before. So yeah, I've got a wife and I got 2 kids that I love dearly, and I can't just think of myself when it comes to this. I've got to think about my family as well. And yeah, and I know that a lot of people that I'm in contact with have been told, you know, their phones might be bugged and stuff like that. Well, their phone calls might be listened to, potentially due to being in contact with me. So you have these conversations from time to time. But I mean, for me, kind of like, you know, I'm a full-time dad basically for the most part. I'm taking my kids to school and changing nappies and stuff like that. I'm doing 2 jobs and just trying my best basically to stay above water in my daily life. So luckily, it doesn't really give me time to ponder that too much, which is a saving grace for me as well. So yeah, but it's definitely tough because, you know, sometimes you do think, should I just give up? Is this worth it? You know, but thankfully, you know, I've got so many dear friends. You know, I've got my patrons who support me. They, you know, don't just support me financially; they support me emotionally as well. You know, and that's my safe place to go on to Patreon and talk to them and stuff like that. And then, you know, I've got many other friends who helped me. There was one time I remember I was just going to quit Twitter and quit journalism because a journalist I'd really looked up to just basically went crazy at me and started like throwing all these horrible abuse at me online. Well, it felt like that anyway, and it really upset me because I'm like, well, actually, if one of my icons doesn't like me and is criticizing me and stuff like that, I just can't be bothered. I've just done with this. I don't live for this, you know. And you know, I got a call from Lou Elizondo, you know, and he just picked me up, you know, and he was like, "Don't worry about it. You're doing a great job. You know, you've got to get back on there. We need you," and stuff like that. And yeah, it's just kind of like, it's great to have people like that, you know, who do inspire you. And yeah, you are going to get people in the community, especially fellow journalists and stuff like that, who do attack you, and it's like that, you know. But you've just got to rise above it at the end of the day, and you just got to carry on reporting the truth. And you know, if any of your stories are inaccurate, you've just got to you've just got to correct them, you know, or update them. And I've always done that. When the facts change, I'll update the story, you know, because the main thing is that my audience is well informed. You know, we've discussed it already. You know, I think I've got a pretty good track record from reporting breaking the news of the NASA UAP study to the first hearings that happened in decades, to plenty of other stuff as well. So
the Office of Global Access, that was one of your biggest. Don't leave that one out.
Yeah, that was quite a big one as well. And I guess just piecing together just kind of like how these missions are put together, and how they work differently depending on the situation as well. So yeah, that it's just really important to me just to provide accurate information and to provide value to people. Because that's what I'm trying to do. It's not about me, it's about the information that's the most important thing, and how good the information is. So that's always what I'm just focused on. And yeah, so that's always my drive. It's the information, it's the value of the information, not my personality, nothing else about me. It's the information and whether you can trust it.
I'm confused. I thought it was my phone call that picked you up, and then also Elizondo. So
no. Lou's a great guy. I tell you what, when you're with Lou, like there's so many synchronicities that happen. Like it's like he understands life in a different way. You know, like he didn't have a plan for all this happening or anything like that. It just all came together like he knew it was. Like I remember when there was the big phone home, which was years ago. I wasn't in touch with Lou back then, but I remember like Dan Warren, you know, the guy from TikTok, he's great. He called because everyone was supposed to call their local representatives, and it just so happened that Dan Warren's local representative was Tim Burchett. And I got a message from Dan Warren basically saying, "Look, my member of like Congress has got in touch with me after I reached out to him, saying he's really interested in this and he wants to reach out and get connected to Elizondo." And I was like, "Oh gosh, I don't know Lou, but I can introduce him to the other Lou Jimenez." And Dan got in touch with Lou Jimenez, and then Lou Jimenez introduced them. That was that, you know. And it's that stuff happens all the time with Lou. I remember I was in London with him once as well, just standing outside a pub, and this guy walks past saying, "I know you. You're from, you know, this TV show, and you know you're the whistleblower and stuff like that." And the guy went on to be his agent. Just like that stuff happens all the time, you know. It seems around Lou's life, all these synchronicities. It's really bizarre.
He's huge, man. He's huge. He really is. I love Lou, and we're all big fans of him. Elizondo has done, you know, he basically started this whole ball rolling. He and Chris Mellon started this ball rolling, or we wouldn't be sitting here right now, and all these other people wouldn't have come out were they not the predecessors. So Chris, let's give you an opportunity to pump up your stuff, and then we're going to get out of here.
Yes. So you can find my articles on www.liberationtimes.com. So you can find me on there, and on Twitter/X you can find me my handle, which is Chris UK Sharp, I believe. And keep on following the stories. It should be a pretty interesting year, but at the moment we're all just waiting to see if Trump takes action. So there's like two potential routes, you know, three potential routes. That Trump takes action now, Trump is forced into action with new people coming forward, and the new Dan Farrar documentary as well. So he's forced into action because the credibility of the people and the information is so serious, incredible, that he's forced to do that. You know, or we got the Sky Watchers as well. So, you know, Jake is basically, you know, don't just believe what I say. I'm gonna verify it. You know, I'm gonna summon these craft and bring them down, you know, through that, and invite them to land. So let's see what happens, you know. So we've got different potential routes to disclosure. We're just hoping that, it speeds up.
I have to tell you, somebody, I think it was Miss Jessica NB, our mod, wanted you to see if we could get you to say free Karen Reed like that. I told you about the case like a while ago. You probably don't remember about it, but can you say free Karen Reed?
Who's that? Because I remember quite some time ago, because we've got like some famous really, really bad people, like murderers in the UK, bad people. And I remember, I think like one time they got Donald Trump to like say free such and such, like not knowing who it is, or when you say hello to my uncle, it's his name, not knowing it was a Yorkshire Ripper or something like that, and because he didn't have any knowledge of it, like I think Donald Trump just went along with it.
Way to be politically correct, Chris.
Yeah. So all right. So real quick, because this lady you're seeing on the screen, we're going to show her in a minute. We're going to talk about her in a second because she's coming up February 5th on the show. Okay. But basically, Karen Reed was accused of, she had dropped her boyfriend off at this house. He was a Boston cop. She dropped him off at the home of another Boston cop after they were partying with a group of cops. And essentially, she was accused of backing up over him at 24 miles an hour and hitting him. And nobody would approach the home because this Boston cop was quite powerful and his family in the town was quite powerful. Sound a little bit like England with those sort of class, things. His family dominated the town. And so basically they arrested her for murder. But none of the injuries that are on this, sadly, this officer named John O'Keefe, the anniversary of his death is about 4 days from now. None of the injuries are consistent with being hit by a 6,000-pound SUV at 24 miles an hour. They're indicative of being smacked on the back of the head with a big gash on his head, dog bites on his arm, and some abrasions as if he was in a fist fight. But no broken bones and no bruises on his body from being hit by a car. So because they didn't want to approach the homeowner, they decided to make the fall girl this single 40-something woman who's a college professor that was dating this cop. So that's Karen Reed. And the first trial ended in a hung jury, so they're going to try her again. And that's kind of like most of the people you see in the audience here, with a smattering of our UFO audience as well.
No, definitely. One of my favorite songs is Hurricane by Bob Dylan. It's like Injustice.
Yes. Reuben Hurricane Carter. Yeah. Michelle Littlefield, who you see here, I had an hour and 15-minute conversation with her yesterday. Someone who brought this case to the national media. Basically, he is a Christopher Sharp, but he's in Boston, and his name is Aidan Carney. He calls himself Turtle Boy. That's his handle. He's a YouTuber as well. He brought this case to the national media, and so the police, the prosecutor, and one of the witnesses in the case, one of the women who was in the home when John O'Keefe was killed, went after Turtle Boy, and when she found court documents that represented a restraining order that was filed by the Albert family, she gave that to Turtle Boy himself, and she actually didn't do it, but they accused her of doing it, and they fired her. So we're going to have her on to talk about her experience there and her life before that as a private investigator before she went to work for the court. So very courageous woman. Chris, your stuff will be in the show notes. All of your stuff, Liberation Times, your Twitter, as it always is. And I can't thank you enough for being here, brother.
No, thank you. It's been such a pleasure. I always love going on these shows. It gets me pumped up going on with the cabbies. So thank you all. Thank you all for being with me this evening. It's been fantastic as always. I appreciate all your company. So thank you.
Yeah, proper cabbie goodbyes real quick from Nathan, Debs, and Courtney.
Yeah, real quick. Chris, thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time this evening. I hope you have a peaceful rest this when you log off. It's been too long. Thank you for staying around this long. And really kudos to the work that you're doing. I know that it is difficult to be as committed as you are. And I think people just look at this as like, oh, look how easy this is. This guy just churns out these articles left and right. It takes a lot of work. And I know that takes a toll. So really appreciate that you're doing all of that, and know that you've got fans here that are very supportive of that time and energy. And also, we wish your family the best. It's great to hear that everyone's doing well, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So I just want to say, no matter who they are, be they a king or another journalist, don't stop writing because of someone else's mouth.
Damn right.
You open minds and you move the ball forward. No one expects perfection from anybody. And if they do, I don't know what planet they're from. So just be you. You're doing great. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your time with us.
Thank you so much, Deb. Thank you. It means a lot.
I'm gonna gush, so don't cry now. As a long-standing reader and appreciator of all your work, I just want to say that it's a little bit sad to hear that you backed out or wanted to back out because of one of your heroes. And so that really resonates with me of the pain of what one would feel, because you've been on the cutting edge, the leading edge. You've done the sourcing, you've done the hard work. One of the main things I appreciate about you is your fact finding, checking, your journalistic standards that you bring to everybody and set that standard. So I just want to say that to you, and don't give up, and keep plodding forward. There's so many exciting times ahead, and you've been a huge groundbreaker on that. So I deeply respect you. And also, please keep posting photos of that baby and your wife, because I'm serious. Like, when I'm doom scrolling or whatever, I see it. I'm like, oh my God, they're such a lovely family. So
Thank you.
loving them, and I'm so glad that you post that, and we get to see the cheery side of your life when you do that. So thanks for including a lot of us in that.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Lily made her debut on the show, I think. So I'll have to bring her back on, I think.
Absolutely. We would love to have her on. And there's a fellow Brit who stayed up to watch you. This is Ken Hathaway from Nottingham, right there. We have a couple Brits that watch for true crime and now are aware of you, Chris. So maybe you have a new fan. And Chris, thank God I called you one day and you said, I kind of miss being on cab. And I was like, oh shit, let me get you scheduled then. So yeah, we're delighted to have you back on. We do love you. And, I look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you, brother. And thank you all for having me on. Thank you for your kind words. And I can't wait to be on again. So let's do it again soon.
All right, people. We're gonna cut it for tonight. I want to thank on behalf of Christopher Sharp, Money Nathan, Debs, Courtney. This is DJ saying peace out. One love. We'll see you down the road, and we're always wondering what's up around the bend.